I really should shave soon. Chili Teed and Cry for Help. And yes, I am perfectly aware that I probably pronounced Chili Teed wrong. I don't care at this point. I'm lumping these two episodes together in this review for two reasons. One, that Chili Teed is just setup. It's just set up for later events that are going to be explained better later. And while that doesn't mean that I think it's a bad episode, don't get me wrong, I don't think it's bad. It does mean that I just don't feel like this episode has a whole lot to stand on its own. Primarily, this is set up for later on when the Gems will encounter and battle Malachite as Alexandrite, and set up for Steven's dreamwalking ability, which we will see explored in detail later on. And it does some stuff really well. There's some very visually interesting stuff in this episode and a few very amusing moments. But unlike some episodes of the show that I can go back and rewatch multiple times, every time I go back to rewatch this episode for one reason or another, I just find that I lose more and more interest in it. And while the quality of the episode is not entirely dependent on how much rewatchability it has, that's definitely a factor. And because I have talked about the things that this episode sets up elsewhere in other reviews already and in other videos on my channel, I just don't feel like there's anything to say here. Now, the events that this sets up, I definitely feel benefited from this setup. So if you haven't seen those later episodes and you haven't seen this one yet, definitely watch this one first. I just don't feel like there's anything really for me to say, which brings me to reason number two. The fact that the next episode, Cry for Help, is also set up. Now, it's not set up for stuff that's going to happen much later in the series. It's set up for stuff that's going to happen in this immediate arc, but it's still mostly a setup episode. The primary difference being that while Chili Teed's plot was superficial at best, Cry for Help actually has a legitimate episode plot and is a legitimate standalone episode in addition to being set up. Peridot has returned, not physically, but her presence is being felt again because she has somehow managed to jury-rig the communications hub to work again, and is attempting to use it to broadcast a distress signal to Yellow Diamond. And while we can assume based on later events that the signal doesn't get out, the Gems have no way of knowing that it's not going to get all the way to Homeworld. They have to stop it. But rather than use Sugilite this time, because of how much Sugilite overreacted the last time she was formed, Garnet makes the choice to fuse with Pearl instead into Sardonyx, who is also large and powerful, much like Sugilite, but who has a completely different type of personality, one that you guys may know from some other stuff I've said, is far from my favorite. Not that I dislike this character, it's just, she's pretty low on my list of Steven Universe characters. I just find her a little annoying. That's entirely beside the point. I just threw that in there because I knew if I didn't talk about the fusion itself, some of you guys were going to mention it elsewhere. Anyway, Amethyst blames herself for Sugilite's behavior back in Coach Steven. And what I really love about this episode, what makes this a very good episode in my mind, especially for a setup episode, is that for quite a while you think that that's going to be the plot of the episode. That as the communication hub is repeatedly repaired again and again and keeps sending out signals again and again, you think that Steven is going to help Amethyst recover some of her self-esteem by either capturing Peridot or preventing her from repairing the communication hub again. We even got a song about it. But then at the last minute, it turns everything on its head because it turns out it isn't Peridot repairing the communication hub over and over again. She did the first time, but not any of the subsequent times. Instead, it's been Pearl trying to chase away her own feelings of inadequacy by continuously refusing with Garnet, by continuously making herself feel stronger. And of course, Steven and Amethyst, who have been looking to find Peridot, see Pearl repairing the communication spire, and of course, they tell Garnet. And of course, Garnet is very hurt by this, because she takes fusion very seriously, as she rightfully should. What Pearl did to her here was a violation. It's difficult to gauge to what degree of violation it was, because gems are very different from humans and fusion isn't exactly analogous to anything that we humans experience. But it is clear at this point that it is some sort of violation and that Garnet has every right to be as upset as she is. And there are two things that always stand out in my mind whenever I go back and rewatch this episode or go back and think about this episode or consider it for a theory, for example. And that's one, that when we first see Pearl repairing the communication spire instead of Peridot, the viewer's natural first instinct is going to be to say, well, Pearl would never do that. That's so out of character. But, and that's what makes this show as brilliant as it is, if you take a second then to consider Pearl's character and to recall that Pearl does feel inadequate because of who and what she is, and that that's something that we've seen evidence of before, you slowly realize that it is entirely in character for her to do this. It doesn't make her right by any stretch, don't get me wrong, but you can definitely understand why she would want to do it. And two, I love Amethyst's reaction when Garnet finds out. Amethyst's first instinct is to defend Pearl, because she knows exactly how it feels to feel inadequate, to be dissatisfied with who you are, and to want to feel like you're something more. Her feelings of inadequacy come from a completely different place than Pearl's, but they're still there, and they're still just as valid, and in a lot of ways are just as, if not more severe. And I love that despite those feelings of inadequacy, despite the fact that Amethyst wants to be trusted over Pearl again so that she can fuse with Garnet, despite the fact that Amethyst is jealous of Pearl in this situation, she still jumps to Pearl's defense. Because who else in this situation shares that experience with Pearl? Who else can come to Pearl's defense here? I just always really liked that. It was a very cool, very poignant scene to me. This episode doesn't really resolve anything. It, as I said, just sets stuff up, but it's still a very good episode that's a pivotal point for some of these characters. The coming arc, I typically just call it the friendship arc, was probably the most extensive and most in-depth look at some of the relationships between some of the Crystal Gems that we've ever gotten in this series. It sucks to see the characters so at odds with each other at the end of this episode and over the course of the next few. And I am speaking as someone who knows how this arc turns out, so bear that in mind, but I think that this episode and the subsequent arc that it starts is one of the most important in the entire show. And definitely one of the best as well, partially because it can make you feel that way. Because it can make you feel so unsettled by seeing these characters so at odds with each other. It just does its job very well. That said, guys, what did you think of these episodes? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. Either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.